J. Clayton Erb, 1856-1908, taken out by the viper and the vampire. If you were to ask artificial intelligence to draw a picture of a typical, moderately successful 50-year-old Philadelphia businessman or politician in 1890, I'll bet the result would probably closely resemble James Clayton Erb. Stout, balding, bristling black mustache, glowering expression. He could be interchangeable with dozens of other upper-middle-class swells in their three-piece suits and their pocket watches, who could be seen daily bustling down Chestnut Street or hanging out in the Capitol halls in Harrisburg. In 1890, J. Clayton Erb had it made. He was right-hand man to one of the movers and shakers of Philadelphia politics, Israel Durham, boss of the 7th Ward. Erb had worked his way up to become Izzy's personal secretary and actuary. Now, as a reminder, Israel Wilson Durham, born the year before Erb, had been elected police magistrate in 1885 and 1890. In 1897, he was elected to the Pennsylvania Senate from the 6th District to fill the unexpired term of Boys Penrose, who had risen to the United States Senate. You remember that story from All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 37, Boys Will Be Boys, for more on Penrose and his brothers. Izzy was a delegate to the Republican National Convention from Pennsylvania in 1900, 1904, and 1908. He was appointed state insurance commissioner by Governor William A. Stone and then reappointed by Governor Samuel W. Pennypacker. He held this post until June 1, 1905, when he resigned to go west for his health. He abandoned his position as party leader in January 1906. He was reelected to the state senate in 1908 and took the place of Senator Scott. Izzy Durham was a political boss of Philadelphia's 7th Ward. He was influential in the selection of Philadelphia's mayor, most of the city government members. Around 1906-1907, when he went west for his health, there was a scandal involving the mismanagement and fraudulent handling of state insurance funds, which centered on Durham and Erb's state insurance department, which was responsible for regulating insurance companies and managing insurance funds that were meant to cover state properties and buildings. The two men were accused of collaborating in a scheme that diverted state insurance funds for personal and political gain. The most serious allegations including awarding insurance contracts to favored companies in exchange for kickbacks and embezzling funds meant for state use. Both men denied wrongdoing, but the scandal did hurt their reputations. It was during this period that Izzy Durham withdrew from political activities, citing his health concerns. Erb began to consider options for utilizing the wealth that he had amassed through various investments. He had acquired property at Glen Riddle in Delaware County near Media. At the age of 50, he thought it was time to get married, establish a household, and raise a male heir who would inherit his estate and assets. In pursuit of this goal, he sought a spouse, perhaps not with the thoroughness that such a significant decision warranted. His choice was a beautiful young widow named Margaret Maggie Florence Conway, 20 years his junior. He'd met her at a New Jersey Shore gathering. She dressed very fashionably, and she was clever at handling a horse, which caught Erb's eye immediately. In her younger days, Maggie and her sister Kate had been in a vaudeville bicycle act called the Conway Sisters. They were considered rather risque at the time because they wore bloomers. Bloomers were a type of lower body covering for women in the mid-19th century. They provided more movement and freedom than the standard Victorian fare. Bloomers were most popular in the 1850s, but their popularity reemerged in the 1890s during the bicycle craze that swept America. This is the woman that Clayton Erb wanted to be the mother of his heir. Now, gradually, Captain Erb, as he insisted on being called because of his Spanish-American War experience, would find other things about his new partner. First, Florence had been married before to investment banker William G. Rothermel. He had walked out of a house they shared at 529 North 18th Street just to get rid of her. Rothermel was a wildcat investor, so he was constantly taking risks with his investments and apparently with his life. On August 1st, 1906, William G. Rothermel, age 42, was found dead in his bed. Rather than sign off on the death certificate as heart disease, the city coroner said, "Mr. Rothermel did not die of natural causes. If I tell any more, we shall never get that woman." But apparently nothing came of this suspicion. Rothermel's death certificate lists his cause of death as suicide cyanide ingestion. After his time with Florence, he had briefly remarried. He's interred in the family plot at Laurel Hill West. Only later was it revealed that Florence and W.G. Rothermel had never actually married. They were living together as a common-law couple. Well, Clayton thought that Florence would be a perfect mistress for his domain, so somewhat scandalously they moved in together at his new 112-acre estate outside of Village Green in Delaware County. That's about 4 miles outside of Media. They lived together secretly for about 2 years before they did marry in September of 1907. Florence adapted easily to being chatelaine for the 15-room house, which had been named Red Gables. The newlyweds went on fox hunts, both together and separately, and Florence made friends with the younger set of wealthy neighbors. Servants and some neighbors felt she was too friendly with some of the young men, especially a certain unmarried physician. When Clayton caught wind of the neighbors' gossip in the spring of 1908, he spoke with Florence about the circulating rumors. He was met with explosive fury and forced to apologize. He explained he was not accusing her of anything. He only wished her to be aware that the neighbors were talking. Well, this led to a temporary reconciliation. But now Florence's sister, Mrs. Catherine Kate Beisel, came into the picture. Half-sister, actually. Beisel was several years older than Florence. She was not characterized by contemporary newspapers as either attractive or handsome, terms commonly used during that era to describe individuals perceived as pleasing in appearance. The term handsome was applied to both men and women regarded as visually appealing. Attractive often referred to someone's looks at a particular moment. Catherine had a glass eye, which she consistently concealed beneath a veil. She worked as a factory foreman in Philadelphia. Her husband was employed as a railroad conductor. Catherine was a frequent visitor to Red Gables. From the very beginning, with her short temper and sharp tongue, she made enemies with the master of the house. Another rumored frequent visitor was the neighboring young doctor, but any attempt that Clayton made to broach this subject brought more airborne crockery. Another thing that the captain didn't know about his new bride was that she was unable to bear children. The newspaper mentioned something about a surgery. Okay, this assumes she had some sort of procedure, let's say in the 5 years surrounding 1900. Let's see, as a retired emergency physician, what surgeries were being done in 1900? Certainly not a transvaginal hysterectomy. That was almost totally out of the question. Surgical sterilization procedures like tubal ligation were still pretty much unheard of also. A transabdominal procedure would have also been dangerous and left the survivor with a large, cosmetically unappealing scar. So another possibility is maybe an incomplete miscarriage that led to permanent scarring, a botched therapeutic abortion that led to scarring and infertility. Who knows? She was infertile. No matter what the cause, this was the final straw. The captain suddenly turned the house into a battleground. Servants, there were about 15 of them, twice reported hearing gunshots in the middle of the night, which were never spoken of. When Clayton was away on business, Florence's parties became wilder and more daring. She pushed the limits of her husband's patience, which often failed to hold. It was common gossip about the time pretty Florence Erb fled screaming to the tower of the house with her husband in feverish pursuit. Once, in an eruption of uncontrollable rage, he threw her on the floor and broke 2 of her ribs, necessitating her confinement to Chester Hospital. August 24th, 1908, Florence had Clayton's African-American coachman Eugene Polson arrested on a charge of threatening her life. At the hearing in this case, she said that she had been informed that Polson was acting as a spy for Captain Erb, who stood by his coachman and bailed him out. He subsequently explained that he did so because he expected to institute proceedings against Mrs. Erb and expected Polson to be an important witness in the case in which Mrs. Catherine Beisel was to be involved. On one occasion, Captain Erb instructed his wife to pack and get out before sunrise. Although she requested to remain until morning due to illness, he maintained his decision, directed servants to pack her clothing, and arranged for her to travel by wagon to Lenny, that's Lenni, an unincorporated area near Chester Creek, where she stayed for the remainder of the night. When Erb fell ill in September 1908, he told his sister Kate that his wife had poisoned him. He also told his sister that he was getting a divorce. October 6th, 1908, Clayton Erb had been away all day to march with his beloved 3rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Regiment in the Founders' Day Parade in Philadelphia. Sister-in-law Catherine took advantage of his absence and stayed the night at Red Gables. They had guests. Catherine had returned to Village Green by the time he reached home, but he was furious and he banned Beisel from the estate. Clayton and Florence had another horrible fight, which concluded when she threw a ceramic flower pot at him and split his scalp open. Erb retreated to his room, dressed his wound, and went to bed, and for a while all was quiet. But about 10 o'clock, a shadowy figure moved its way down the driveway and slipped into Red Gables' mansion. Florence had summoned Catherine to be by her side, and only 2 people know for certain what happened next: the stepsisters Catherine Beisel and Florence Erb. Shortly after midnight, a coachman from Red Gables raced over to the mountain house at Lenny and notified the proprietor that Captain Erb had been shot and Mrs. Erb wanted help. Constable Simpson of Roxdale went to the house, and on the strength of statements made by Mrs. Erb and Mrs. Beisel, he placed the latter under arrest, charged with murder. The revolver with which Erb was shot was found in Mrs. Beisel's dressing room. There had been a bitter quarrel, and Mrs. Beisel said she'd fired the shot to protect her sister. Captain Erb was lying in the hallway of the 2nd floor of the house with a bullet wound in his head. At the coroner's inquest, Catherine Beisel explained, "I shot Captain Erb. I'm sorry, but I could not help it. He pointed a revolver at me. Suddenly, I had the strength of 7 women. I took the revolver from him and pressed the trigger. It kept shooting. I could not stop it." Except that the captain's revolver was found in a drawer in his bedroom. It had not been discharged. And there was a box of open cartridges with several bullets removed on the washstand in Florence's room, and the 2 pistols were of different calibers. After a massive funeral, Clayton was buried in the family plot at Laurel Hill West before a crowd of 2,500 people. The captain's friends had defended his honor with vengeance. They wrote and published a 74-page screed about Florence and Catherine. Here they are called the Vampire and the Viper, and the book is called Red Gables, The Black Shame. The author simply listed as the captain's friend. Copies of this red-covered gem are quite rare, but you can find a PDF on the Delaware County Historical Society website. It is impossible to know how much of the backstory was fictitious, but the Conway sisters were painted as conniving, heartless wenches in hot pursuit of money, fame, and all of their attachments. The booklet was labeled as, quote, Memoirs of a Murderess Found in a Hollow Oak Tree at Red Gables, Wrapped in a Pair of Bloody Pajamas. The trial began on December 29th in media, nearly 3 months after the funeral. The DA laid out his case. Mrs. Erb knew the final chapter of her life at Red Gables was at hand. She knew Captain Erb was about to compel her to leave the mansion. If you want the motive for murder, here it is. But she could not do the deed herself and share in the estate. If Mrs. Beisel should do the actual killing, the estate would still be hers. The defense would be, not every killing is a crime. The law has placed around every individual the right of self-defense for protection, and it is the foundation of our liberty. Our defense is self-defense. Now, Florence wore a snug-fitting black morning dress, as was the fashion of the day. She said that she went to the Erb country home in May 1906 with a housekeeper and 2 maids. Trouble between her and the captain started on the first night they were there. He cursed and swore and told her she did not know how to run a house. She said that her husband refused to sit at the dinner table with her brother, who had come to the house to install a bathtub, saying he would not eat with common plumbers. She related, We quarreled, and he struck me with the back of his hand and knocked me over a chair. The next day I had to call a physician to treat me. In December 1906, he put me out of the house, and as I was standing on the porch thinking what to do, he came out and seized me by the throat and threw me to the floor. An ornament in my hair was broken, and my head was hurt. I was unconscious when the housekeeper came and found me there. Captain Erb told her I had fainted. As a result of my injury, I had to go to a sanitarium. One evening, the captain found fault with some article of food on the table. He blamed it on me. I tried to tell him it was not my fault, but he swore at me, and I ran to my room. He followed, and he yelled at me, You must leave this house at once, or I'll blow your brains out. He got his revolver out, and then he put it away again. I was so afraid he would shoot me that when he left the house a little later, I went to his room and I took it, and I hid it. And when he came home, he demanded the revolver. I told him I'd hid it. He chased me around the table in the dining room, trying to hit me. And when he couldn't catch up, he spat in my face. Later, he followed me to the library, and as I took the revolver from behind some books, he caught me and grabbed for the pistol. As we struggled for the weapon, he deliberately bent me over a davenport, put his knee on my stomach, and pressed till I cried for mercy and let go of the revolver. One of the maids came in and said, Please, Mr. Erb, let her go. Later, the captain insulted her in front of one of the housemaids by calling her names and saying she, quote, came from the Point Breeze dumps, end quote. She told of numerous instances when Erbs swore at her, struck her, tore her clothes. Before she left the witness stand, she related one more harrowing tale. One summer afternoon, he picked my sister up and threw her out of the house. Later, he tried to force her through a swinging door, and in his frenzy, he began choking her. I'll choke the life out of you. I'll fix you. I'll put out that other eye on the bum so that you can get another glass one. I didn't know what to do. I thought he was killing her, so I grabbed a whiskey bottle off the table and I hit him in the back of the head. He dropped Mrs. Beisel, and we both ran for our lives. The next day on the witness stand, Catherine Beisel admitted that she had pulled the trigger on her brother-in-law, but only in self-defense. She startled the court as she gladly acted out many of her movements in the witness box. She said that she fainted afterwards and could not provide any details. Thursday, January 7th, 1909, after 18 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom just as the judge arrived to hear their verdict. There was absolute silence. The county clerk went through the ritual of asking whether the jury had agreed on a verdict, and the foreman announced the verdict of not guilty for both women. There was seconds' pause, a dead silence, and then with a half scream, the sisters fell into each other's arms. Everybody in the courtroom was on their feet. Women wept as they looked on the pathetic scene. The jury was not polled. Both women got to thank them all before they were dismissed. With her not guilty verdict in hand, Florence Erb applied for and received a significant portion of the captain's estate, including an insurance policy that had been filed for accidental death. She quietly moved to Nebraska in 1909 and assumed her maiden name of Florence Margaret Conway. She went to nursing school. June 5th, 1909, she married Francis J. Ellison, became his third wife. His second marriage, which he had ended by divorce only a few months earlier, had been declared illegal. January 4th, 1914, Florence's divorce from Ellison was granted for desertion and failure of support. A newspaper clipping ended by saying, "Mrs. Ellison is of prepossessing appearance and is about 30 years of age. She declined to talk to newspaper men." And then she disappeared for a few years. There was a newspaper clipping dated December 15th, 1919, from the Philadelphia Inquirer. For the first time in 10 years, Mrs. Florence M. Erb, principal in Delaware County's most sensational murder story, turned up in the news yesterday as a war nurse seeking permission to return to this country from Koblenz, Germany. Now, when the United States entered the Great War against Germany and Austria, Florence volunteered her services as a nurse and went across with the Nebraskan troops. She stayed with them during their training period and accompanied them to the front lines. Those familiar with her war history state she proved herself valorous on many occasions and was a veritable angel of mercy to the wounded men of her regiment. Following the signing of the armistice, Mrs. Erb left the Nebraskan troops and was assigned to the Army of Occupation, assuming new duties at the base hospital of Koblenz. After the war, she returned to Nebraska, where she lived under the name Margaret Florence Conway. I find no record of legal problems or further marriages. Her name occasionally appears in a Nebraska newspaper for some charitable work that she had done. Eventually, she moved to Washington, D.C., where she died in August of 1956. She left behind no living relatives. Margaret Florence Conway, a.k.a. Mrs. J. Clayton Erb, a.k.a. Mrs. Frances J. Ellison, an acquitted husband killer, was buried with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Tracking Catherine Beisel's burial place became a challenge since the newspaper persistently spelled her name as traditional Catherine, C-A-T-H-E-R-I-N-E. It turns out, I had to do some back research, and I found out that I don't know whether she changed her name or the newspapers had it wrong, but she spent the rest of her life as Catherine, K-A-T-H-R-Y-N. She was born in 1867, and she is interred at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeadon. And no, I could not find why she lost an eye.